Hello folks, welcome back to another edition of SHU Outdoors. My name is Mick, I'm your host, and today we're going to do a deep dive on the Order of Nine Angles. I was the cellmate of Ethan Melzer, the U.S. Army soldier that was convicted in a civilian court in 2024. He pled guilty and he received a sentence of 45 years in prison. Ethan and I were cellies for approximately 2 months while I was housed at MDC Brooklyn. And today on this video, I'm going to get into his personality. We didn't become the best friends in the world, but we were definitely friendly. We were in the cell together for, like I said, approximately 2 months, give or take a few days. We had several chats. In fact, I liked the guy enough that I gave him all of my property when I was eventually released from prison and allowed to return to my home. He was not so lucky. He received 45 years in prison. And we'll get into his personality. But right now, as you can see, we've upgraded the studio, and I'm going to do a commentary of a channel called Unspoken, a YouTube channel, and he did an excellent documentary on a relatively short, excellent documentary on the Order of the Nine Angles, and he speaks about Ethan in the process of the video. So without further ado, let's go ahead on and get into it and see what this guy's got to say.
In June of 2020, a U.S. Army soldier, Ethan Melzer, was arrested in a U.S. base in Italy for plotting an attack against his own unit just days before their deployment to Turkey. He had been collecting classified information, including troop movements, security plans, and location maps, to share with the group planning to ambush the soldiers. However, Melzer wasn't working for some foreign government or the usual terror group suspects. Instead, he was aiding a global satanic cult intent on destabilizing society through violence. This video will shed the light on one of the darkest organizations operating today, the Order of Nine Angles. When most people think of Satan,
always call it the most inappropriate
times. The first thing that usually comes to mind are elaborate rituals involving candles, robes, and sacrifices. While that assumption isn't entirely wrong, many satanic cults and sects are rooted in ritualism and pagan traditions. The vast majority of them, however, are non-criminal.
Gotta take it. Some calls you just gotta take.
And secular philosophy instead of a literal belief in the devil. However, there are exceptions. Groups that stand apart as dangerous anomalies. Secretive societies embedded within our communities truly devoted to the worship of Satan. One of the most notorious among them, and the focus of today's video, is the Order of Nine Angles. The Order of Nine Angles is a global cult of devil worshippers who are, in the name of Satan, using violence to destroy the very foundations of Western society. And in order...
Now, let's talk about Ethan. My impression of him. He was fighting his case, and I was fighting the case too. An escape from a federal halfway house. I'm a white guy. He's a white guy. They moved him from another floor because they needed a cell up there for another race, and I was a single cell white guy. He was a white guy, and we were both fighting the case, and I was already in the cell, and they moved him down there with me. Turned out that me and him got along actually very well, because I'm not one just to jump the gun on every little body if I don't like something, or whatever, And anyway, we were in the cell together. He came to the cell during count, said, "Hey, man, they moved me down here. I'm going to be your new cellie." I had no idea who he was when he first moved into the cell. And then obviously we got to talking. He had been there for about a year when he moved down there. So he had his property, he had everything, I guess you could need in a jail. radio, MP3 player, etc. Now, Ethan did not fit the stereotypical impression of what you would think of when you think of somebody who's allegedly a Satanist. He looked like to describe him to you, because there is not a lot of photos of him online. Remember, he was a U.S. Army soldier. He got arrested by, I guess, Army intelligence, and then they moved this case over to the civilian court, Southern District of New York. So they obviously have access to all the photos of him as a soldier in his Army fatigues and any mug shots that may exist. So I did track down like one photo that was somewhat available, and it looked like him, even though he had a mask on. Knowing him without the mask, it kind of really is was very similar to his look. So to describe him to you, think of Opie Taylor, all right? No tattoos, an adult version, probably about 23, 24, reddish brown hair, clean cut, worked out 4 or 5 times a week, very neat, clean, organized, a very likable guy. He definitely didn't fit the mold of what one would think of when you think of, quote unquote, a devil worshiper. If you saw him in a police uniform or a military uniform, you would say, wow, that agency should put him in the photo for recruiting. A wholesome, clean-cut looking guy, very intelligent, and I would go so far as to say likable. So when you're in the cell with someone and you like each other, you talk. And an important side note, I never talk about any kind of information or anything that the authorities don't already know. You know, so I'm not here to assist any law enforcement agencies in any investigation. If I talk about something on any episode of this show, this YouTube show, the authorities already know about it. Ethan pled guilty to acts of treason, espionage, terrorism, etc., etc., etc. Now, when we talked, he said, yeah, Mick, I'm going to plead guilty, and hopefully, I can get 20 years, maybe 25 years, which is a significant amount of time. But if you're 25 in excellent shape and excellent condition, there's a possibility you could live through that, come out the other end, and have a life. But I guess the judge and the U.S. prosecutor had a different idea. He pled guilty and received 45 years in prison, which I am sure, after talking to him and getting to know him, if he had any idea they were going to sentence him to 45 years of prison, he would have never pled guilty. The only reason why he pled guilty, he thought that he would receive 20, maybe 25 years, which definitely is a significant amount of time. But again, there's a possibility of living through that and coming out when you're 55, 56. I'm 56. I work out, so they could be life after that. 45, when you're 25, 45 more years, you're going to be a really old man. And whatever reasoning Justice Department and judge had to do that, who knows? But that's the way it played out. A little bit about the Order of the Nine Angles, and this is straight out of the mouth of someone who was a stream practitioner. What Ethan actually did was he was in the United States military. He was an excellent soldier. He never received any kind of bad write-ups during the whole time of him soldiering. He had only been in the military approximately a year and a half, because I think you got to sign up for like a 2-year stint or something like that. He had been in for about a year and a half, passed basic training with flying colors, whatever training they wanted him to take, he took it and passed it. And the whole time, he was getting as much intelligence as he could with the express intent of conveying that information to opposing forces in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in this case, Turkey, extremist groups that would hopefully attack his regiment that he was with, that he was attached to. And by attacking the U.S. regiment, much blood would be spilled, and potentially the U.S. would declare another war on Turkey or Iraq or wherever this extremist group was at. And the sole reason for him wanting to do that was to facilitate as much spilling as human blood as possible, as much suffering, chaos, and mayhem of society, and the spilling of human blood, whether if you consider the individuals to be on the right side or the wrong side. Ultimately, tremendous amounts of human blood would have been spilled if he could have potentially, him and the terrorist groups that he was working with, could have potentially pulled this episode off, this escapade. He was getting information, giving it to extremist groups with the hope that this extremist group would attack him and his regiment, and even if he was ultimately unalived as a result of the attack, he considered that to be acceptable, with the sole goal of spilling as much human blood as possible. And by doing so, it pays the ultimate homage to dark entities. You know, if you think about it, what is a dark enemy's ultimate goal? Is to destroy humanity, to create chaos out of chaos, where enlightened men attempt to create order out of chaos. Men and women, human beings, the dark gods wish to create more chaos, ultimate chaos, out of chaos, and to spill as much human blood as absolutely possible. That was his goal. And he admitted this in court. He pled guilty. When you plead guilty in a federal court, you have to stand up and say, yes, I did do X, Y, and Z, and Z, and Z. Otherwise, the judge will not accept your plea. You have to knowingly and willfully admit to what you did and say, yes, I am guilty of X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, a federal judge will not accept your plea, any judge for that matter. You have to acknowledge that, yeah, this is what I did, and I take responsibility for that. So that was his goal. I talked to this guy many, many times. He was a very likable guy, a very intelligent guy, worked out pretty consistently, excellent physical condition, clean cut as the day is long, a white guy, actually very handsome, clean cut, little curly red hair on top, clean cut kind of around the sides, a little pushback, no tattoos. Not at all what you would think of when you think of quote-unquote a Satanist. Let's get back into the video, because this guy does an excellent job of explaining the topic as a whole, but he didn't know Ethan. I did.
Encourages members to infiltrate military and Christian institutions in order to subvert them from within. Ethan Melzer, the soldier introduced in the beginning of this video, is an example of an infiltrator who attempted to betray his unit's movements so that the O9A could sell the intelligence to militant groups abroad. These O9A operations are referred to by the group as insight roles, adopting a new identity, joining a target organization, and undermining it internally. The order regards violent acts as tools to destabilize the modern community. Besides that, beyond theatrical satanic rituals, which they also do, O9A literature promotes real human sacrifice, which it calls calling. They have literal writings explaining how these victims of sacrifice should be chosen and how the calling should be executed. These writings also contain an optimal list of individuals that they view as corruptive or obstructive to society. For example, rivals from other satanic societies, Christians, journalists, and political activists. I mean, even other fringe satanic groups, like the Temple of Set, which was run by Michael Aquino, if you know who that is, describe the O9A as kind of the most radical of satanic organizations. On top of that, O9A publications and communications have also been accused of encouraging sexual violence. One O9A text, reportedly titled The Rape Anthology, allegedly urged followers to derive spiritual gratification from violent sexual assault. Such material has been tied to claims that the group is connected to networks of sexual predators. In 1998, Searchlight magazine reported alleged links between Order of Nine Angles and pedophile networks, and some O9A publications were accused of distributing material that crossed legal and ethical lines. All of this deliberate transgression is meant to undermine the Western society and to decay the very pillars of modern civilization. With the dawn of the Internet, the Order of Nine Angles and its publications migrated to the digital underworld, spreading their ideas among increasingly younger audiences. Online, the group grew more decentralized and began intersecting and even collaborating with other dangerous movements. The O9A evolved into a loose network of small cells called nexions, many of which consist of only a handful of members. A major force behind O9A's rise in the United States was Joshua Sutter, a longtime American neo-Nazi and occultist, widely regarded as the founder and leader of the Temple of Blood, a violent American offshoot of Order of Nine Angles. Sutter ran Martinet Press, which distributed O9A literature and its ideology of militant Satanism to American audiences. After Sutter's arrest, reports emerged suggesting that while disseminating O9A material, he was also working as an FBI informant, raising speculations that some of his publishing activities may have been part of a larger operation. However, these claims remain unverified. Sutter's efforts to distribute O9A literature across America worked, spawning several satanic nexions across the country. One of the most disturbing alleged connections was to an underground online extortion ring known as 764, founded by a young man named Bradley Chance Cadenhead. The group reportedly operated a Discord server dedicated to the exploitation and abuse of minors, including sexual extortion, physical and psychological torment, and the sharing of illegal material. Members of 764 were said to be heavily influenced by extremist cults, among them the Order of Nine Angles, and the group has been described as one of O9A's most notorious nexions. The crimes linked to O9A and its ideology are numerous. Every so often, a person or nexion associated with the cult surfaces in the headlines for committing horrific acts of violence. In June of 2020, 18-year-old Daniel Hussein murdered two sisters in a London park as part of an occult ritual intended to fulfill a demonic pact promising him wealth and power. Hussein was reportedly steeped.
What do you think Epstein Island was about? It played two roles. One, it destroyed innocence, created a lot of suffering, pain, which the dark gods would feed off of. And it also allowed certain intelligence agencies to collect information on our highest ranking, some of the highest ranking individuals in the United States government, and not just the United States government, princes, princesses, kings, all types of individuals. Because if you have that type of damning information on people, you can control them. Okay? What would happen to the United States government if the true facts of all the individuals that went to Epstein Island, and don't think for a moment it was just men, okay? People want power. Certain people will go to any extremes to have power. Imagine having a nuclear football, a guy right beside you. You understand what kind of power that is? To make a phone call and the whole army moves in a certain direction or another direction. When you ask yourself, why hasn't that information been released in its entirety? Because it would destroy the United States government and several other governments. Also, the individuals who have that information would lose their power and control over those individuals. That would put all those Senate, Congress, all those presidents potentially, not just here, but in other countries and all around the world, in jeopardy. Because if those individuals were kicked out of office and criminally prosecuted, individuals would then be put in those offices that they didn't have all this damning information on. Why do you think certain politicians vote in such a manner that they can guarantee that they will be voted out of office the next election? Because they have no other choice. And if they play football or basketball or baseball or whatever game you chalk this up as, some kind of sick, sadistic game where the spilling of human blood is the ultimate sacrifice to the dark gods, they get to do all kind of insider trading. So what if they get voted out of Congress or the Senate after 2 or 3 terms? They leave. We went there with like $10,000 in their bank account, maybe, and they leave with $100 million because they played the game. Look what happens to certain individuals who don't play the game. What do you think all this spilling of human blood right now and all these horrible holocausts right now, and I don't have to call them out by name. Anybody who watches the internet knows what's going on around the world. Why do you think it's happening? The spilling of blood. When the United States bombs a country, it's not just the political leaders or high-ranking government officials that are harmed or injured. It's also everybody that is subject to that bomb that fell. Kids, children, babies, innocent women, non-combatant women. You know, when you use the word woman, and that could be misleading. You have a lot of women that are very combative. But in this instance, I'm talking about non-combative women that are just begging for milk for their babies. What better sacrifice could you make to the dark gods? To spill innocent blood, to do unspeakable things to children. All right? Not only do you serve the ultimate purpose of the high priest who wants to facilitate pain, suffering, and innocent blood being spilled, but you allow intelligence agencies to collect information on you unknowingly. Why do you think this is what's going on in Washington, D.C. is going on there? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to read between the lines. Unfortunately, if we went around questioning everything we saw in our everyday life, it would be maddening. Ethan was a perfect example of this. If you saw this guy, I think I said it before, but if you saw this guy in a military recruiting poster or a police recruiting poster, you'd be like, yeah, I see why they put that guy in the poster. Okay? Because he would probably get a lot of people to sign up. Just the image that he would present. Clean cut, all American. All right? No indicators that he was a Satanist. He just happened to spill the beans or talk to maybe potentially one person who notified Army intelligence. Who knows what kind of deep moles they have on the other side. But if that information had not been discovered, it's quite possible it would have set off another bombing campaign. If extremists had ambushed a whole battalion of United States Army soldiers and potentially did a lot of damage to that battalion, I'm quite sure that the United States government would have took issue with that and started a whole bombing campaign. So the guy is very intelligent and he almost pulled it off. How many times has it been pulled off and the person or the perpetrator wasn't discovered? How many times has the United States government bombed people all over the world because of an incident where an Army battalion was ambushed? It's a deep thought, right? All this stuff that's going on around the world, all these secret societies, skull and bones, you know, you hear about them, and it seems like a clean-cut guy that's a part of it. Somebody who could be your son or daughter or your niece or your nephew or just some handsome person, girl or guy, you know. You say, okay, you're a member of the Masons or some other much darker skull and bones that is an exclusive little group that is centered around, you know, Harvard or whatever, and you say, that's this, and you vote him in as president anyway. I mean, Donald Trump is a draft dodger, okay, but now he's held up as the model of strong American, make America great again, go soldier. He's the kind of cream puff that tells real soldiers, hey, run up that hill, up at that 50 caliber machine gun, and take that hill. He ain't going to do it. He ain't going to ask his son to do it, but he'll ask your son to do it. And many people will do it. How do you think all these young people get sucked into all this craziness? They're vulnerable to it. They're subject to it. That's the psychology behind it. Let's get back into it.
In O9A influenced ideology and active in O9A related online forums. What is perhaps the most unsettling part about O9A is that we don't have a clear idea of how deep their influence goes. Yes, every so often a headline pops of a certain O9A connected member committing some horrific act of violence, but most of these are either teenagers or young men. The very idea of Order's insight roles, this infiltration of members into Christian and government positions, begs the question how deep these members are truly entrenched in our society. This isn't some case of baseless satanic panic. This is a really dangerous group that seeks to destroy the very foundations of Western society. In online discussions, however, some claim that the Order of Nine Angles is a honeypot, an entrapment operation orchestrated by the intelligence agencies. Even David Myatt himself, the founder of O9A, talked about being part of a honeypot. Some online texts allege that the FBI itself funded disinformation campaigns against O9A, portraying it as more sinister than it really is. What is certain is that it's important to talk about these kinds of organizations because their dangerous ideologies are easily spread around the internet and are very appealing to lost young individuals. I mean, many atrocities linked to O9A were committed by younger members of our society. I think it's important to spread the message of how dangerous certain ideas really are. I think everyone should be aware that these kinds of dangerous communities, cults, do exist in our society. Especially parents who I think should keep a very close tab on what their children are viewing on the internet today. Because if you don't know what your kid is struggling with, if you don't know that they're lost in society, they might just seek help from dangerous individuals like David Myatt and members
or Ethan Melzer. Here at SHU Outdoors, we get deep and we go hard. Not only am I a YouTuber that kind of specializes in the prison genre, generally speaking, I'm also an avid outdoorsman, a prepper, among other things. Now, I've been around, and I think I can bring a whole lot to the YouTube community regarding prison, the psychology of incarceration, deep thinking, not just necessarily entertaining stories, even though I'm not above doing those either. My next episode, I intend for it to be based on SAC, the Soldiers of Aryan Culture, out of Utah and with a huge presence in the federal prison system. I'm going to concentrate on an individual by the name of Snare. He was on death row. He's the individual that unalived that black inmate, allegedly with a Sereno that was a cellie. I'll get into the workings of racial dynamics amongst the whites in that episode and explain what SAC actually is, and what actually occurred with Snarr. I'm very aware of the true story that led to the violent incident where him and his cellie slipped his cuff, stabbed the correctional officer to disable him, not just for the sake of stabbing him, to disable him, to stop him from interfering with what they wanted to do to this individual. And I'll get into that in the next episode. So subscribe if you haven't already. And let's get this channel up and kind of lacking. And I won't let you down. We're going to go hard and go deep and explore all these topics together. So until next time, stay up. Peace.